In the relentless, high-stakes ecosystem of elite European football, a young star's trajectory is usually a steady, upward climb. You know the drill. You dominate the youth development pools, you break into the senior starting 11, and you establish a spatial monopoly over the center of the pitch that secures the future of your club for a decade. But human anatomy is a fragile, unpredictable machine. Welcome to today's Explainer. Right after the dust settled on the 2026 World Cup, a massive, catastrophic medical bomb detonated directly inside the Theatre of Dreams. Manchester United's 21-year-old generational engine, Kobbie Mainoo, has just been diagnosed with a severe, structural lower back injury. Okay, let's dive right into this, because this shockwave completely explains the bizarre mystery that left millions of fans scratching their heads last week. Remember when England manager Thomas Tuchel abruptly left this young phenomenon completely out of the high-profile bronze medal match against France? Well, fans on social media were incredibly skeptical. People were spreading this absolute nonsense that the midfielder was urged to fake an injury just to avoid playing in a so-called meaningless fixture. But the reality? The initial scans are alarming, the recovery timeline is extensive, and the tactical framework of Manchester United's upcoming season has been set completely on fire. We are looking at the inside story of the injury that broke the Premier League.
To totally squash those rumors, Thomas Tuchel delivered a stark confirmation during his press conference. He stated plainly that Mainoo felt a sharp pain in his back during the final training session before the France clash, making it physically impossible for him to play. And listen, this isn't just some minor tweak. Mainoo is actually one of two massive names struggling with a severe back problem right now. Arsenal's William Saliba recently suffered a very similar fate. He was managing a chronic lumbar problem for months before it flared up at the World Cup, sparking fears that he could miss 4 to 5 months if surgery was required. Simply put, when an elite player says they felt a sharp pain in their back, medical alarms go off everywhere.
So the crucial point here is understanding the absolute panic over at Old Trafford, and to do that, we have to look directly at the unique footprint Mainoo leaves on the pitch. He is the absolute cornerstone of Michael Carrick's midfield tactical system. When under intense defensive pressure, Mainoo actually operates in the 97th percentile for ball retention. He uses this incredible microspatial agility to turn away from physical attackers and progress the ball cleanly into the final third. He acts as the ultimate human pressure release valve. If the backline is choked out by a high press, Mainoo just drops deep into the half spaces, collects the ball with his back to the goal, and single-handedly maps out the passing corridors to unlock the attack. Losing an asset of this caliber? It doesn't just create a gap in the roster. It completely deletes the structural floor of the entire tactical system.
Think about the microscopic tactical disaster this leaves for the upcoming Premier League title race. Without Mainoo anchoring that pivot, United's defense becomes intensely vulnerable to counterattacks, and they are already dangerously thin in the middle of the park. Just look at the current midfield casualty list. You've got Mainoo out with this severe lumbar stress reaction, Manuel Ugarte is out long-term with a devastating ACL injury, and because of this massive void, Mason Mount is now being forced entirely out of his natural position to play a much deeper pivot role. It is literally a nightmare scenario for Carrick's engine room.
Let's shift gears and run the advanced sports science telemetry on exactly what a severe back injury means for a dynamic player like him. The lumbar spine is the absolute kinetic bridge of a professional athlete's body. It has to absorb the sheer physical impact of every high-speed deceleration, every sudden lateral cut, and every rotational torque generated when striking a long pass. When a young elite player suffers a structural back issue, it's almost always the result of extreme physical overexertion and repetitive load fatigue. This leads to conditions like disc desiccation, where the discs between the vertebrae literally dry out and degenerate from overuse. Mainoo has played an astronomical volume of competitive minutes over the last 24 months, anchoring a brutal domestic campaign before immediately absorbing the physical toll of a World Cup. When your deep core muscles fail from sheer exhaustion, that spinal framework just slips right out of alignment.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer mind-boggling scale of this problem across elite sports. Take a look at that 26%. A fascinating study from Modus Physical Therapy tracked asymptomatic degenerative changes in the lumbar spine, and they found that disc desiccation prevalence is as high as 26% even among elite Olympic athletes. Over a quarter of the athletes operating at the absolute pinnacle of human performance are just walking around with structural degeneration in their lower backs. So this isn't some rare freak anomaly. It is a fundamental occupational hazard of pushing the human body to its absolute mechanical limits. But you might be wondering, why on earth does a 21-year-old have the spinal wear and tear of someone decades older? While the Modus study points out that these elite athletes typically begin intense, specialized professional training when they are just 6 or 7 years old.
We are talking about 15 straight years of repetitive physical strain and constant microtrauma. That is a massive biological cost. By the time a generational talent like Mainu even reaches the World Cup stage, his spine has already absorbed decades of kinetic shock.
Medical insiders will tell you that treating this type of injury requires absolute, non-negotiable kinetic rest. You can't just power through it. But here is where the tension between human anatomy and club demands reaches a boiling point. Despite the sheer severity of a lumbar stress issue, initial reports from The Athletic suggest a shockingly aggressive recovery timeline. Diagnosed in July at the World Cup, he is expected to return to the Dublin preseason camp by August 10th. And get this, there's a friendly match against Leeds scheduled just 2 days later. Looking at this timeline, you really have to wonder, are they rushing a compromised spine back onto the pitch before it's actually healed?
And this brilliantly illustrates why that timeline is so alarming. True recovery follows a very rigid protocol. According to Square One Physio's return to sports criteria for lumbar stress reactions, an athlete cannot safely re-enter a live match until they clear a strict, multi-stage kinetic rehab grid. Step 1. Achieve full, completely pain-free range of motion. Step 2. Aggressively rebuild postural awareness, core strength, and kinetic control. And finally, Step 3. Successfully demonstrate pain-free sport-specific skills in a highly controlled environment. Medical professionals demand this because if an athlete engages in rotational training too early, their physical development entirely stalls. Rushing those first 2 steps is a guaranteed recipe for a career-altering relapse.
So what happens if rest and rehab just aren't enough? What if a severe lumbar injury actually requires a surgical procedure, like a discectomy? To understand the true stakes here, we have to look at the historical precedent. A fascinating study published in the Spartan Medical Research Journal conducted what I call a fantasy points autopsy. They ingeniously tracked real-world in-game performance using fantasy sports scoring and wins above replacement, or WAR, to quantify exactly how elite athletes performed before and after they underwent lumbar surgery. It gives us a really cold, sobering look at the biological realities of going under the knife.
The good news? Return is definitely possible, but the success percentages vary wildly across different contact sports. When we look at the numbers here, NFL players had a shockingly low return-to-play success rate post-lumbar surgery, sitting at just 64%. Now, NBA and NHL players fared a bit better, climbing up into the high 80s, but looking at these varying percentages, it heavily emphasizes one thing. While a return is possible, for a massive chunk of elite athletes, severe back surgery is an absolute roll of the dice with your livelihood. The physical stakes for a career are immense and not guaranteed by any stretch.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because even for those who successfully return to the pitch, the data reveals a pretty steep, unavoidable cost. According to the study, while a player's performance might temporarily peak right after the operation, the data proves an overall long-term decline and abbreviated career lengths. NFL players averaged less than 3 years of career length post-surgery. NBA players maxed out around 4 years. And for baseball players, it took on average a grueling 24 months just to regain their pre-surgical performance levels. The structural integrity of the human spine, once compromised at this level, rarely allows an elite athlete to sustain their peak for another decade. Which brings us to the ultimate question hanging over Old Trafford today. We are literally witnessing the dangerous intersection of tactical desperation and fragile human anatomy. United desperately needs their anchor back, but pushing a 21-year-old's lumbar spine past its breaking point carries immense long-term stakes. So I'll leave you with this. Can Kobbie Mainoo heal properly and defy the sobering biological data? Or has the relentless, overloaded European football ecosystem permanently cracked Manchester United's generational engine? It's a storyline that will absolutely define the upcoming Premier League season, and we're going to be watching it very, very closely.